So we were working on the listed agreement last week. So we had gotten all the way through paragraph 10. So we're going to start today on paragraph 11. And paragraph 11 is the types of real estate representation, disclosure, and informed consent. So in this paragraph, it's just outlining to the seller that what the different types of representation are. The first type, of course, is seller representation when you're representing the seller. Next type is buyer representation if there is a buyer agent involved in the deal. Then you get into the more complicated disclosures, which would be designated representation. And as we all know, designated representation is when you have two Samson agents representing two different clients on the same transaction under Samson Properties. That's a required disclosure. So if you do have that situation, make sure during the ratification process that you do have the disclosure for designated representation filled out. So here on this agreement, of course, the seller has to either consent or not consent to whether or not they are going to allow designated representation. And of course, as we want the maximum amount of people to come into our listings, and because Samson has over 5,700 agents, we don't want to close the door on all those potential Samson agents, so we want to advise our seller to allow designated representation. Dual representation, however, on the other hand, is when Steve, as the listing agent, is going to also potentially represent a buyer in the transaction. So I'm representing both the seller and the buyer on the same transaction. The disclosure required for that would be disclosure for dual representation. And there's, I think that one is a 2-page disclosure. You got to make sure that you fill that out as part of your contract as well. The company policy on that, of course, is they would prefer that if you don't have ties to that buyer, that you try and treat that buyer as unrepresented if they are okay with going in that direction. Otherwise, they're okay with you being a dual agent on a sales or a buy transaction. Remember, rental transactions, they prohibit dual agency on rental transactions. So you would check the appropriate box on here. Me, Steve, I always check seller does not consent, because when I'm talking to a seller, I want them to understand that I'm only representing them in this transaction. If a buyer does come and they don't have an agent and they want representation, I can refer it out to another Samson agent. If they don't care about an agent, we can go forward and they would be unrepresented. So I kind of explained that during my listing presentation with them so that they understand the potential for possible buyers coming in, so I don't have to tell them when it actually happens. Paragraph 12 is the compensation paragraph. This paragraph is revised in December of 2023. So it starts off the broker compensation. Seller will pay broker total compensation of. And I'd like to highlight total compensation, right? So when the seller is paying Samson total compensation, they're paying, this is the amount that they're going to owe us, right? And from that amount, we pay out a buyer agent. So it's the total amount that the seller is on the hook to pay. Now you can put that in various ways. The first block you can check and put in, it's just a percentage of the gross sale price. The next box you could check is you could do a flat dollar amount, or the next box you could check is a percentage of the gross sale plus a dollar amount. So if you're doing if you have a transaction team fee or something of that nature, I would recommend that you use the last box and put in whatever you're charging, plus in the dollar amount, whatever your team fee is. And I would put in there that it's a team fee. Some folks charge a transaction coordination fee or whatever fee that they may be charging. That's not the Samson brokerage fee. That would be the $345 fee. But so you can kind of denote it in different ways. The broker compensation is also earned if whatever the days you put in here, days after the expiration or termination of the agreement. So in this paragraph, it's pretty much saying that, hey, if our agreement ends and someone buys the property that came through the property for up to 30, 60, whatever you put in there, Samson Properties could potentially be on the hook to receive compensation for that. However, if they do sign up with another broker and relist the property, that all goes away. So if someone showed the property during your listing, your listing expired or terminated, and then they showed they listed with another company and put it on the market, and that same buyer came forward, we would be out a commission on that because they hired another real estate company. Paragraph B is a broker service fee. Here is a great place to put the $345 fee. Even if you don't charge your clients the $345 fee, I highly recommend that you write it in here. And then on the other terms in the back of this contract, write in there, listing agent to pay $345 brokerage fee. That way you get credit for not paying, for taking on that $345 fee. Here they know that it's a Samson fee. It's charged on every listing and every buyer side transaction that we do. Why not put it in your agreement that that it's being charged, and then put it in the other notes that you're paying for that fee. So I would recommend that you put in the $345 fee on all your agreements, whether it's buyer-broker, your brokerage buyer agreement, or your listing agreement, and then in the other terms, write in that you're paying that fee. Paragraph C is your buyer agency compensation. So here, the buyer agency compensation is an amount taken from the broker compensation. So they're not separate fees here, which we get a lot of agreements in here, and you may have been the recipient of an email that I sent that says, hey, I notice in paragraph 12A you're charging 2.5%. Hey, and also in paragraph C, you're paying out 2.5%. Are you doing this listing pro bono? Because 25 total compensation minus 2.5% buyer agent compensation is zero. So, and then all of a sudden I get back, no, I thought it was listing side and broker side. Well, no, it says right here, buyer agency compensation is an amount taken from the broker compensation and paid to any broker representing buyer in this transaction. So this is where you would put in here what you're going to pay out to a buyer agent compensation. Now, if you have been with Samson for a long time, you know that Samson had a long-standing policy to offer out 2.5% as your buyer agent compensation. However, back at the end of September, they removed that policy, so you are free to put in whatever amount works for your transaction. Now, I say that with a heavy heart or with some information. I would say that you would want to make sure, no matter what number you put in here, that you are doing it on behalf of the seller. So if the seller's driving the train, that's one thing. But we are seeing a lot of agreements that people are lowering this number to better their bottom line. It's been a bad year. Instead of making 2%, I need to make 2.5 or 3 or whatever. Make sure you're not disservicing your seller. Because if you're in an area where there's other listings in your area that are offering a certain level of compensation and you're offering considerably less, yes, you may sell. But the question may arise is, did you get the amount of traffic that the other properties are getting based on the fact that you're offering out less compensation? And we're seeing that, right? Because I'm hearing people come in and they're talking, and I'm seeing buyer agency agreements too, that there's a thing in the other terms, they're charging, say, 2%, and in the other terms it says buyer does not want to see listings that are listed for less than that are offering less than 2% or less, right? Because they don't have the money to come out of pocket to pay their agent the additional cost. Well, the buyer could ask the seller to offset that compensation if they wanted to. However, that's in this type of market that we're currently going through, that's a tough request, right? Because it's theoretically a seller subsidy, right? So I would make sure whatever number you come in here with, that it's in competition with what's going on in the area that you're listing. So it's set up pretty much the same way as the other paragraph above. So buyer agent compensation, whatever that number is, 2.5%, or a straight dollar figure, and then or a percentage plus a fee. So if there's an additional amount that you're offering out, like a bonus or something like that, you could write that in there as well. And then, of course, this is not really new language, but they, because of the lawsuits that are going on with NAR, they highlighted it and said the broker compensation and the sharing of compensation between brokers are fully negotiable and are not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law, or any multiple listing service or association, right? So just like you do your own research on comparables for the price, I would start doing your own comparables on what other companies are offering out compensation. So when you're sitting down going through here, you're not stuck on this conversation. So a lot of times when I sit down, most sellers only care about their bottom line. What's the percentage that they have to pay, or what's the number that they have to pay? So like if I'm sitting in a listing appointment and I tell the seller I'm charging 5% for my services, and from that 5%, I'm offering out 3% because the neighborhood, everything in this neighborhood has a 3% buyer agent co-op, and I don't want to put you at a disadvantage by offering out less than that. And I very rarely have a seller disagree or argue with me about compensation. And most of the time, if I feel my conviction is that strongly about the buyer agent compensation, if they want a reduction off of their total compensation, I'm going to reduce that from the total compensation and try not to attack the buyer agent compensation. So, because another email I send on occasion, right, is if you've been the recipient, is if I see a total buyer agent compensation in there, I'll say, so, I'm just going to throw a number, 1%. Okay, 1%. I'll respond back and I'll say, hey, when you're a buyer agent, are you okay with 1%? And most of the time the answers are mixed, but it's a good question to ask yourself when you're doing this. Is first of all, are you going to be happy as a buyer agent? Buyer agents are working really hard right now. I mean, how many buyer agents are here, right? All of us, right? How many multiple offers have you written? I mean, if you're writing one offer per buyer, congratulations, right? But right now, you're writing multiple offers for these buyers. You're looking at numerous properties. I've been working with one set of buyers now for like 4 months. Properties are trickling on that they're interested in because they're so specific of where they want to go. But, and then every time a property comes on a Thursday, they got multiple offers by Saturday. And it's an unbelievable process. So any questions on compensation? Microphone's on its way.
That's what Danny said. What?
You don't have to repeat.
I don't have to repeat it. Okay, that's true.
Yes, Cece.
I have working on one listing, and I explained that what you're saying, and then I said, "What would you like to feel comfortable, Leticia, for the buyer side?" It said, "Whatever you think is a professionally right to do so."
Right.
That's good enough.
I never have that conversation. So when I'm sitting down at a listing appointment, I never say, "Do you think that's a good number?" I just say. When I get to it, I just say, I researched the neighborhood, and 90% of the listings in this neighborhood are offering 2.5 or higher. I'm recommending 2.5 2.5%. Is that good? And I've never had a seller say no, that's not good.
Remember the last time when this whole thing come uproar about lawsuits and things like that,
Mhm.
and we were supposed to ask, what do you want to pay out for the ask the seller that what would you like to pay out for the buyer side?
Right.
So from 0 to whatever. So that's why that I asked that.
Well, it's in
right
there.
now,
It's in there. It's a negotiable item,
right.
but the sale price is negotiable too, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So, I mean, when you're sitting there talking about the sale price, I normally, you normally are talking about, hey, here's what I recommend. Here's what I recommend based on my data. Here is what I recommend that you do. And then they say, no, I'd like to list it for $50,000 more, right? So that's how that conversation, the buyer agent compensation can go the same way. You don't have to say, I recommend, it's what do you want to offer out here? Like, I mean, I wouldn't recommend you leave it blank. I would recommend that you do your research just like you do when you're filling out this form. I would recommend you do your research, and when you're sitting down with the seller, this form already be filled out. If the neighborhood says 2.5%, or if the neighborhood says 2 or whatever, you could have that conversation with the seller at the time you're sitting there with the listing and say, hey, 80% of the listings in here are offering out 2.5% or higher. I recommend we offer out, I put 2.5, that's what I recommend. They could say, well, I'd like to, and then you could ask them, what's your bottom line, right? Is the bottom line you want to offer out less money to the buyer agent, or is your bottom line you want a lower total commission? In most cases, they just want a lower total commission. So if you have some flexibility in your total commission, I would suggest that you say, hey, I'm going to ask, I got 5 potatoes up here and 2.5 potatoes down here, or whatever, however you want to word it. I'm willing to do it for, instead of cutting this to 2, I'm willing to reduce my commission to 4.5 or whatever that number is, because I feel so strongly that I feel the buyer should get paid that amount, and your listing is going to get maximum exposure based on that buyer agent compensation. So that's the way I would tackle it. I must have did good. All the hands went down. One more question up here.
Recently, I was part of the transaction representing the buyer side, and this was the buyer I had helped find a home before. And so he kind of reached out to me after settling all the terms with the seller. It was a commercial condo. So it was listed as 3% for each agent on the listing. But then, my buyer called me and he said, he has worked very hard and he doesn't want to pay out that much commission. Would you be okay to go for a little less compensation? But I do want you to be on that, because he thought, he would just be dealing with just one commission, which is the seller's commission. I said, absolutely, you are doing good that, you got me in. To look out for your interest, I'll do that. No worries. So that was from 3% to 2.5%.
Right.
And then he calls me again and he said, can you do it for 2%?
This is the listing agent?
The listing agent said, because the seller's agent, she refused to budge down. She refused to lower her commission part.
Right.
And so, the seller talked to the buyer and he said, oh, my agent is she says she worked hard for the whole year for this listing. Right. And so your buyer agent can take another further cut. Yeah. So then I cut it again to 2%.
Well, I know on commercial, because I don't really want to touch too much. I'm not really a commercial agent. But I know in commercial, they do negotiate the commission after there's an offer in on the property sometime. But in residential side, what's ever offered in the MLS is what is being offered out by the seller. You normally won't have these type of conversations unless your buyer is coming in with an offer that may be too low. And in order for them to make the deal, they may come back and say, well, we're willing to make this deal. However, the seller is asking if you'll reduce your commission from A to B. So you might see that on occasion when a price point is too low for the seller, and they're going to consider that offer. However, in order to make it work, they're going to come back to you and ask you to take a hit on your commission. And if you ever do take a hit on your commission, remember, you should get that in writing, right? Especially if you're on the listing side, because the Bright MLS compensation agreement is a binding agreement that you're making to the buyer side. So if you change that agreement, it should be in writing, right? And should really come from the broker. So if you're making those changes, make sure that you get a broker to initial off on it. Okay? Thanks for the question. All right, moving on. I'm going to talk a little bit about variable rate commission here. Variable rate commission, right? This is if for some reason you are the listing agent and you also sell the property. So sometimes you may want to list a variable rate compensation in here. So say I'm willing to drop my commission from 6 to 4 if the buyer is unrepresented or comes in as my own buyer. So you would write that here, and you have to disclose that in the MLS listing. It has to be disclosed, right? Because when you have multiple offers, a lot of times if you have multiple offers, right, some of the questions that you get asked as a listing agent, and one of them should and always be is, are any of the offers from Samson? Did you write any of the offers? Why are they asking those questions? They're asking those questions because of the variable rate compensation. So I may be reducing my commission by 2 points, which is a net benefit to the seller. So I got to think about that as a buyer's agent when I'm making an offer on another property if there's a variable rate commission. The other reason why you want to have this conversation with your seller is because I'm going to give you a real life situation. Agent has a listing. They sell the listing themselves as an unrepresented party. 2 days before settlement, the seller gets the ALTA and sees the commission being dispersed to the Samson agent. And the seller says, there was no buyer agent. Why are you getting that 2.5%? That should come back to me. So the listing agent now had to go back and explain that the total compensation listed in paragraph 12A was that for the seller, was the seller's obligation to Samson Properties. So, of course, that seller was not happy. And it's 2 days before settlement, and they're refusing to sign the ALTA based on the fact that they thought they were going to get that 2.5 or whatever that number was back, and that was money they're losing. And I want to say it was like an $800,000 transaction. So that's $16,000 that seller thought, or $16,000 or $20,000 that seller now is thinking that they're losing, because they thought that because the agent, and of course their variable compensation was blank, which means they didn't agree to any variable rate compensation. So they ended up splitting the difference and giving the seller some money back in order to move forward. But what an uncomfortable conversation to have with your seller at the end of your transaction, because you want to end your transactions on a positive note, right? Because sometimes it doesn't matter what happens the whole transaction. If something goes wrong in the last couple days of that transaction, that is the taste that your client gets in their mouth for the whole transaction. So make sure, I know in today's world of digital everything, we zip these agreements off to our clients and they sign them electronically, and we don't really talk to them about this. But I would highly recommend and encourage you, especially when you're working with a seller or a buyer for the first time, send them the agreement as a PDF so they can't sign it. Then call them up and say, hey, I just want to go over some key points in this agreement with you so that we're all on the same page. And then hit those key points in that agreement and then say, okay, are we good? I'm going to send that to you now for electronic signature. And then you send it for electronic signature. I would recommend that same practice for when you're working with a buyer and you send them the contract to sign. Send it to them as a PDF. Then call them. Hey, I just sent you the document as a PDF. Can you open it? Okay, here's what I want to make sure you understand. So make it part of your practice. That way, when you're 2 days from settlement, you're not standing there saying, what do I do? What am I, because a lot of times it's just communication, right? We're in a communication business. Question?
Yes, on the variable rate commission, if we've checked no to dual representation, that'll only kick in if it's an unrepresented buyer.
That would be correct.
Okay.
However, if for some reason you did have a buyer that was interested in a listing that you had, you could always do an amendment to your listing agreement that changes the seller's perspective on dual agency for that one particular client.
Okay. And then what is your suggestion if you are listing a property, an unrepresented buyer comes in and you do want to hand them off to another Samson agent, but you want a referral or a change in your percentage? What's the best way to document those kind of adjustments?
Well, you should, if you have a buyer comes in, they want representation, and I would surely charge a referral fee. What that number is, I would say it's probably not the normal 25%, right? Because you're sending them a willing, ready to write person who wants to write an offer on that particular property. So I would probably do a higher than my normal referral fee, and then I would also disclose to the seller that, hey, we had a buyer that came through. They were unrepresented. I referred them to another Samson agent, and for a referral fee.
So definitely a referral fee versus changing the listing agreement to like a 4 and a 1.5 or something like that.
Huh?
Well, you as the listing agent would get paid a higher percentage than the buyer's agent, which sort of works out as the same as a referral fee. So doing
not
a referral
necessarily.
fee is what
Two
you
different
prefer.
things: referral fee and compensation from the seller. I'm sending Laura a buyer. You're welcome. I'm sending Laura a buyer because I have a listing and I don't do dual agency. They're a first-time home buyer, and I feel, I would never treat an unrepresented party first-time buyer on their own. They just don't have the knowledge. So I call Laura up. I say, Laura, I got a listing in Gainesville. I got a buyer that's interested in writing. I'm going to send it to you for 50% referral fee. Are you interested? Laura says, yes, send it my way. She signs a referral. I send it to her. They write an offer. It's not an increase. The referral fee is going to come through Samson to me. It's not going to show up. It's going to show up as commission to Samson for the buyer side, commission to Samson for the seller side, and then that referral fee is going to float through Samson to me at the end. However, I would disclose that to my seller to let them know that they understand that I am going to make an additional referral fee on this because that this buyer came unrepresented. You don't have to get into the amounts and all that kind of stuff. It's just that buyer came to you, you referred it out, so make sure that you denote that.
Okay, thank you.
Did I do that right, Mr. Briggs? Mr. Briggs in the house. I'm being critiqued. I'm in trouble now. Uh-oh. I lost my place. I can't do this anymore. All right, next one is a retainer fee. If you are charging a retainer fee, you would fill this block in here, and then that check would get written to Samson Properties and then deposited escrow and then get filtered back to you. You would check the box whether or not it's subtracted from the compensation and then move on to the next paragraph, which is early termination. This paragraph is the most unused paragraph in this listing agreement. So if you're doing a listing agreement and you're not using this paragraph and you're putting blank or zero, you're doing yourself an injustice. Why? Because you could be in the middle of your listing and the seller could decide that they just saw a ad for a listing that's far lower than what he's charging you, and he could send you a notice telling you he is canceling your listing agreement, and with no early termination fee, guess what? You just lost your listing for zero. You spent about $2,000 already on getting that property ready to go. So I highly recommend that you utilize this early termination paragraph. It's there for your protection, right? If you have an early termination fee in here and you're tired of the seller anyways, guess what? At least you can negotiate. Hey, there's a $2,000 early termination fee. I'm not releasing your listing until you pay me $2,000. Or, you're a real pain. I'm willing to split it 50-50. You send a check to Samson for $1,000. And once we receive it, cashier's check, money order, please, we'll release your listing. So try and use it. In the event the seller wishes to terminate an agreement prior to the end of the listing agreement, the seller will deliver written notice to terminate the agency relationship between the parties. The parties will then execute a release of brokerage representation agreement to terminate the brokerage relationship between the parties. Should termination be without good cause, seller will pay broker, blah, blah, blah. And then that's what that fee is. So, it really depends on your listing and how much some people put the same amount in every listing that they do. Some people gauge it on how much they're going to put into the listing to get it up and ready for market. So try and fill that out and utilize that paragraph as best as possible. $1 million. Because I'm worth it. Yep. So, yes, question.
Okay, I have a question about the retainer fee. When you put the retainer fee in the contract, are you able, how do you get access to those funds? Simply because right now I know a lot of HOA docs are due, and you have to pay for those HOA docs up front. And in the past, I used to pass it on to, have it paid at settlement. But now they're making you pay them up front. And a lot of times the sellers don't have those fees up front or don't know they have to pay it up front. And so what I was doing is I was putting in retainer fee to collect those funds up front. But how do I get access to them?
Well, so when you're sitting down for a listing appointment and you're talking about the HOA and you do a retainer fee for, let's say, $500, you would put $500 in here, will not be subtracted from the commission because, or will be subtracted from the commission. If you're taking a retainer fee in regards to the fact that you have to pay for HOA or condo resale documents, then you could put a number in there and say will be subtracted from the compensation, right? And then when your compensation comes in, that $500 would get deducted and back to the seller. But you would get a check, right? You would get a check from the seller at the time you do the listing, right? And they sign on the dotted line. You would get a check for $500 from them. You would deposit it with Samson as EMD, denote it as a retainer fee, and then they'll pass it through to you so that you get that amount of money. Laura, do you have your hand up?
I do. I'm just waiting my turn for the. See, look. See? Do I get a cookie for today?
I got a donut for you.
Oh, I get it. Okay, I get a donut. Okay. Now, also just to let you guys know, if you use Cardinal, you can just send your processor the invoices, and then they can directly pay you on the Alta, like a vendor that a seller would be paying on their settlement statement. So that's how we've been doing it, because when you take the listing, you don't necessarily know how much exactly the HOA fees are going to be because of the fees. Like it'll be $325, but then there'll be a fee of $493.24 or something like that. So it'll be an odd number.
Right.
So that's what we do, just so everybody's aware.
And if you're not doing a retainer fee, what she was saying is another reason to do the early termination fee. So I mean, if you have a $1,000 early termination fee in your agreement, and then for some reason the seller wants to terminate, and you've already paid for the HOA documents, which is $350. You could say, well, I'm not going to release you for anything less than $350. I'm sorry. I've already paid $350 on your behalf. So you could do it that way as well. Paragraph 13, confidential information. This is just pretty much saying that the broker is going to keep whatever the seller tells us in confidence unless they tell us any defects to the property, which we are required to disclose to the buyer in regards to the property condition. Other than that, we have to retain and keep that information confidential. Paragraph 14 is authorization to disclose other offers. Here is always a good topic of conversation, whether to disclose or not to disclose the existence of other offers. We have some agents at Samson that always check the box, does not authorize broker to disclose, and then we have some that want to disclose. So me personally, I go either way sometimes, because I've had buyers that as soon as they hear there's multiple offers, they don't want to write, or if they don't know, so if I was to call that agent and say, hey, do you have any offers? The agent on the other side says, I'm not at liberty to disclose that to you. If you're interested, make an offer. Now my buyer doesn't know whether there's any offers, 1 offer, 17 offers, versus someone who you call and you say, hey, we've got 27 offers. Well, I'm sending you 28, okay? Where do I got to be to win, right? I can't tell you that, right? But if so I don't know. I can't tell you what is better. I could argue either side, right? Yes, sir. Sir, yes, sir.
Quick comment on that. Like many examples in these brokerage agreements, remember that the seller makes the decision, not you. So you may have your predisposition on that item and others, but you're supposed to talk about it with your seller and let them decide. I would say that on that issue, whether to disclose existence of other offers, we could take a poll, but my bet is that the vast majority of times, listing agents recommend that you do disclose, or you advise your seller to disclose. It's judgment call, entirely up to them. But if you don't disclose the existence of any other offers, if the buyer agent asks you, do you have any other offers? You have to answer honestly, right? You don't tell them what the offers are. But if you don't disclose that there's other offers, are they gonna be as competitive as they might otherwise have been? I don't know. So just wanted to say, make sure the seller's making the decision after you explain it to them.
Thank you, sir. Next paragraph is compliance with fair housing. So make sure you're complying, and make sure you explain to the seller you also have to comply. Number 16 is relocation program. You'll know for sure whether or not the seller is involved in a relocation program. They'll tell you up front. Paragraph 17 is your condo association, whether or not it is part of a condo association. And you'll have to either check yes, it is, or is not. And you'll have to fill in the appropriate information in regards to whether or not you are, who is going to get the documents in regards to that property. I mean, I would always recommend that you try and get the seller to get those documents. However, I'm also a control freak. How many times have you had a seller and they say, oh, I'll order them. A week later, you contact them and say, hey, did you order those documents? Oh, I'll get on that today, right? So you've already lost a week. So me being, I would prefer the seller doing it now, especially now that the seller has to pay for that up front. But if you're like to control things, then you can do it yourself, and then it's done. Same holds true for the Property Owners Association. If you check it is or is not located within the development, and try and fill this out as best as possible. So that way you know this information when you get your property under contract and you have to provide it to the title company. You may also make sure you do your research, right? You may have multiple property owners associations, or you may have a condo that is part of a condo association and part of a property owners association. So your 3-day review period isn't over until all documents have been delivered to the other side. So I'm just going to use the Reston Association as my example here. So you have a lot of little clusters within the Reston Association. So you may have a cluster that's whatever. They have their own little homeowners association. Then they're all part of the Reston Association. So you have to get 2 levels of documents for that particular association. One doesn't do it. You have to get both. There's other places too that, especially with condos, I want to say the 55 and over community in Gainesville. They have condos inside of that community, so they pay their condo fee and they pay into the property owners association. So make sure that you fully understand what you have to deliver in order to get through that hurdle. Number 19 is your property condition. Whether or not whether or not you have to abide by the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act and provide that disclosure. There are exemptions to that act. You can Google that. I mean, I probably get that question once a month. Hey, Steve, I got a property that I'm getting ready to list as an estate sale. Do I need a property disclosure statement? Well, you can actually Google that, right? And it'll take you to there's a Virginia legal page, right? And it'll go through, there's like 11 exemptions for the disclosure, for that disclosure. One of them happens to be those type of sales, right? But Steve is better, and he is Google. Actually, sometimes I answer my phone that way. Hello, Google speaking. I probably could get in trouble for that, right? Is that a trademark issue there? Number 20 is lead-based paint disclosure. If you do have a property that you're listing that was built prior to 1978, you have to make the appropriate lead-based paint disclosures for that property. There's an additional disclosure agreement that you would add to your listing. You'd normally have the seller sign that at the time they're signing the listing, and then you would upload that in your document section, so that way the buyer's agent would be able to download that and present it as part of their offer. 21 are current liens on the property. So this page, I see this page all the time. Most of the time it's blank. These are questions that you should ask your seller. And 93.5% of the time, they're going to be truthful with you. So remember, 6.5% of the time, they're not going to know whether there's a tax lien on their property, or they may know, but they don't want to let you know. But it's good to ask these questions because it gives you an idea of what you might be up against once you do get a contract ratified and you're moving towards settlement. So this is, and then also you can start to provide this information to the settlement company to let them know that, yes, I do know that the lender is Bank of America. And the settlement agent, your processor might say, oh, you need to get that information over to us as quickly as possible because Bank of America takes forever. So some of the information that you get in here could be very valuable. So please don't skip this paragraph. Paragraph 22 is the seller financing. Has anybody, very rarely we see this, but if you did have seller financing, you would either does or does not agree to offer this, and you would denote it in your listing that the seller is offering financing. 23 are closing costs. Always a good paragraph to kind of make sure that your client understands. Did you have a question? All right. Sorry about that. I'm just too fast.
Steve, going back to 21, if people have solar panels now and they have loans on those solar panels,
Yep.
Does that go under the current liens?
No. So that there's a separate separate amendment now that you would attach to your contract. Actually, you're a couple pages ahead of me, but that amendment is listed now. Solar panel addendum. So you would make that a part of your listing agreement, and it would denote those questions would be answered. Do they own the panels outright? Is there a loan on it? How is that process going to work? So that would be a separate addendum. Paragraph 23, closing costs. So make sure your seller understands what their obligations are going to be. A lot of times they want to know what their costs are going to be at settlement. You can always do up the seller's estimated cost at settlement sheet and bring that with you and attach it if you so desire. Some people use it, some people don't. I think when we first switched over to SkySlope, there was a couple glitches with that form. I don't know if it was a SkySlope glitch or or an NVAR glitch, but I think those glitches have been resolved. Paragraph 24 is seller's proceeds. So seller acknowledges that the seller proceeds may not be available at the time of settlement. So right in Virginia, right? So once you settle, they record, and then the proceeds are normally available to the seller within a day or two after the day of settlement, unless your settlement falls on a Friday. Then they may not record till late Friday or Monday, and then they may not get their proceeds till late Monday or Tuesday. So make sure the seller understands that. They'll get that from the settlement company anyways when they go to settlement, but it's always nice to know up front. 25 is IRS FERPTA. If your seller is not a U.S. citizen or not a green card holder, then you have to check the box that the seller is or is not a foreign person as defined by FERPTA. Now, there's other mitigating circumstances that may allow the seller to not have to have that money withheld. However, that's not for us to decide, right? All we really need to go on is whether or not they're a green card holder or a U.S. citizen. If they don't check either of those boxes, then we check the box that they are a foreign person, okay? Paragraph 26 are the seller's duties and responsibilities. So paragraph A just goes over the seller will work exclusively with the broker during the term, pay broker directly or indirectly, timely compliance with reasonable requests from the broker, and supply any pertinent financial or personal data, cooperate with broker and facilitate broker duties, including but not limited to marketing the property, reviewing offers, showing the property, and complying with state, local, federal laws pertaining to this transaction. So it kind of outlines what our clients are supposed to do for us as we do for them. Seller represents and warrants. Seller is aware that the seller may be responsible for failing to disclose information or misrepresenting the condition of the property. Seller certifies the accuracy of the following information. And then there's some stuff here that you have to ask. Seller has capability to convey good and marketable title to the property by general warranty deed and represent the property is insurable by a licensed title company with no additional risk premiums. I mean, that's the big thing there, right? No additional risk premiums. It also has a couple other things, whether or not they're a licensee, they have any knowledge of any underground storage tanks. The other big one is paragraph 7. Do they have any audio or video recording devices on the property? Okay. I think 85% of the homes now have Ring doorbells, right? So if they have a Ring doorbell, that would classify, right, as some sort of surveillance on the property. So when you have that, right, it has to be disclosed that they have that. Why? Because it could pick up conversations about the buyer and the property, which the seller would have information, right? So you have the buyer and the agent standing out in the front. They got a Ring doorbell. They have them standing out in the front. They're talking about what they need to offer. That's good. What if the buyer says, well, we could go $50,000 over the asking price? Well, now they have intelligence, right? They know now, right? So it's not in keeping with good business practices. So it has to be disclosed. Paragraph C is access to the property. The seller will provide that access. Easier said than done sometimes, right? Paragraph D here, next page. Oops, man, I need to move my slides faster than me. Seller's assumption of risk. Even though they're putting a lockbox on the property and allowing agents in and out, the seller still has to understand that the risk of what's going on their property is still under their control. So they have to, you have to have communication with your seller during the listing period to make sure that nothing bad is happening to that property. If it's vacant property, I would highly recommend that on a regular basis the seller have someone go by the property just to make sure that it's secure. Either you do it or someone that they know should do it just to check the property out. The lockbox, right? So if you have the lockbox on there, it's recording agents that are coming in there, right? So if something bad happens in the property, you want to make sure that you're going to have to be able to track that through. So there's some information in here to kind of give the seller some understanding. I always talk to sellers about prescription drugs, right? And I always tell them, if you have prescription drugs, especially if you're, working with older clients, of course, most of the time they do. You have to kind of tell them to put those things out of sight in areas that are not easily findable. I had a listing one time and the lady had a back problem and she had some sort of painkillers in her medicine cabinet. And we had like a series of open houses, like Saturday, Sunday, like 2 weeks in a row. And of course, she wasn't having any back pain, so she didn't reach for her medication. But finally, one day she went for the medication, it was gone. So we weren't sure if it happened at an open house, during a showing, whatever. But that was early on in my career. So I learned at that time to make sure that you have these type of conversations with your seller so that the same thing doesn't happen to them. Yes, ma'am. Hold on.
What about along those lines? A lot of people now have recording devices inside their home.
Yep.
And I know that MIRS now is particular about information that you put in the bar. Do you disclose that information that there are recording devices in the home in the MLS where it's under public records? Or how do we handle that now? Because I'm seeing that more and more now.
I mean, you could either put it in the agent remarks. Those are not published to anyone other than agent. Or you could I've seen folks put signs up. So like as soon as you walk in the property, it'll say, please take your shoes off. Also be advised that there's surveillance cameras and recording devices throughout the home. That way you saw it in the agent remarks, or you could even do it in the showing time remarks. Like when showing time sends you a thing and it gives you listing information, you could put it in there as well. But I've seen it three of those ways.
I think you should assume that there's something there. I've had listings where the client didn't tell me,
Right.
and I found out later. So they're not always honest. Buyers aren't the only liars, right?
Right.
So, okay.
All right. When in doubt, they're out. No, I don't know. Next paragraph is paragraph 27, seller default. This never happens, right? Right? So seller default. So if you do have a situation where it's seller default, it does kind of outline here that the seller could be on the hook, right? So if it's just kind of a understanding by the seller to make sure that they understand that, hey, yes, there's always a chance the seller could be in default. And if so, the buyer could take the appropriate actions. And if it does end up going all the way to court, it's just notifying the seller that they could potentially not only be on the hook for whatever the monetary damages are, but attorney's fees as well. And commissions, right? So, I mean, if they default, there's also commissions involved. Broker's duties upon termination. In the event the broker terminates agreement prior to expiration of the agreement, broker will promptly deliver to the seller copies of all contracts and other instruments entered into on behalf of the seller, remove property from the listing service, and return the seller any keys to the property if applicable. Broker may retain copies of such contracts and instruments for broker record. So make sure if for some reason you do terminate, you have to provide those documents. Paragraph 28 is miscellaneous provisions. Here it just says, it kind of lets kind of get some information out to the parties, the seller here. We're the first one, kind of in a nutshell. We're real estate agents. We're not attorneys. We're not home inspectors. We're not a bunch of things, even though they think we are. But here it actually says it. So if they do ask those type of questions, we can refer them to the appropriate folks needed, which goes into service provided referrals, right? So if we are making referrals and we're getting paid for those referrals, we have to make sure we disclose those. So that's why we have the affiliated business disclosure for Cardinal Title, because we have owner interest in that company. But if you are referring to, I don't know, whoever, and you're getting money from them on a residual basis based on your referrals, you have to disclose that to your clients. Wire fraud. Because we can't say enough about wire fraud, it's like in every document. We have a standalone document as well in regards to wire fraud. Because no matter how many times we put it out there, people still fall prey to it. So make sure that you tell your sellers during this process that the only person that matters in this transaction are documents they receive through Qualia if they're working with Cardinal Title. And most settlement agents have gone to some sort of secure emailing system as well. Some of the smaller companies have not. I had a transaction at the end of last year. They were still emailing. So some of the documents I felt very uncomfortable about emailing back and forth. So we actually took those documents in hand and delivered them, hand delivered to the settlement company, right? So sometimes you have to go above and beyond for your client, right? Subsequent offers after contract acceptance. So once you accept a contract and you're under contract, there's always a possibility you may receive offers afterwards. You have to disclose them, or you have to present them. And if the seller is going to enter into other contracts, they should seek legal advice, right? Unless you're going to ratify it as a backup, right? Because we have the contingencies clause at the addendum where we can ratify an offer as a backup. We follow the laws of Virginia, and once signed by all parties, this agreement is binding. Paragraph 29 is the attorney's fees. So this just lets the seller know if there's any litigation, those fees are on them. And if they, for some reason, do end up in some sort of litigation with the buyer, of course, the buyer, if the buyer wins, those fees, the buyer's fees for litigation could also get passed on to the seller if such. So we don't ever want to get to litigation if we can possibly get away from it. But it does happen, right? Paragraph 30 is definitions. There's only two here. One is agency relationship, means a relationship in which the real estate licensee acts for and represents a person as an agent. And you have the brokerage relationship, meaning the contractual relationship between the client and the real estate licensee based on terms, provisions, conditions, duties, and responsibility of these agreements. The additions was paragraph 31, is what we were talking about earlier. If it's a short sale, you would have an addendum for that. If it is a solar panel, house with a solar panel, you would have the addendum for that as well. Any other ones that you may have that you would have to write up or put into your listing agreement, you could add on. And then in the additional terms, if you were going to pay for your broker 345 fee, you could note it in here. Agent to cover the cost of the 345, or agent to cover the cost of the home warranty during the seller period. Whatever other terms that you put in here. Then the seller would sign and the broker signs. The listing agent on here is you, not me, not Mr. Briggs, not whatever broker you're sending this to. So make sure you fill this out with your name, not ours, right? We would go in the supervising broker below. A couple notes while I'm talking to you. Please don't put my cell phone in your brokerage agreements. Okay, not that I don't want to talk to your clients, right? But I would just recommend that you're filling this out. Put the main number here. The reason why is, right, if they call the main number, most likely it's going to go to one of our phones and it'll leave a message, right? So pissed off seller or buyer will call and leave a message, and then I'm going to get this message and I can call you and say, hey, Laura, why is John Smith calling me? He sounds pretty pissed off. Then so she could explain to me. So she could explain to me what's going on, right? And then when I call the client up, I have background now. So, you know, it always works better that way, right? Wouldn't you rather that happen that way? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. So any questions on what we covered today on the listing agreement? 2 questions, and then maybe more.
Not sure if this is I didn't see it anywhere in this listing agreement, so I don't know if it changed, but is it still true that if you don't send a copy of this ratified listing agreement to the seller, that they can opt out in paying the seller's compensation or the agent's compensation?
Say again.
Okay.
If you don't send a copy of this back to the seller,
Right.
they cannot pay the agent's compensation.
Yes.
Well,
it used to be that way.
Actually, what you could argue is if you don't send a ratified copy of this back to the seller, theoretically, do you even have a listing agreement? Right? Because it's not delivered yet, right?
Right.
So if you're using Sky Slope, the beautiful Sky Slope, you can fill it out so that it sends it to the seller first. They review and sign it. And then you could set it up to send to the broker second. And then they can review it and sign it. And then guess what? A beautiful thing happens. It sends a copy to everybody at the end. Delivered. But unlike me, sometimes I just send it to the seller separately. And then once they sign, I save it as a PDF. And then I set it up and send it to the broker. And then once I get it back, I have to send it out back to the seller. But the reason why I do that is for other reasons, right? On certain agreements. But yes, delivery should occur. Make sure that it does. Otherwise, the validity of your agreement could be held in question.
Can you tell me a little bit about kick-out clause? What is the kick-out clause and where is the kick-out clause, please?
We could talk about that after. Seeing that we're not really covering that here today, I would be more than happy to talk about that after we're done. But the only other thing I wanted to add to here would... Who did? Okay. She doesn't have the mic yet. But now I forgot my question. Or my answer.
I will do it after.
Hold on. Hava's first.
I guess my question is also for later.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, stay on topic.
The FUBTA. FUBTA, a lot of people just got still kind of ambiguous about it. If you have 2-3 buyers, only had to be one is non-green card holder or citizen, still applicable for FUBTA. Yes, FUBTA.
That would be correct on buyers and sellers.
Right.
So if any one person involved in a transaction is not a U.S. citizen or green card holder, then it has to be noted, and then the settlement company would take the proper action in order to comply with IRS regulations.
It's a buyer as well. I didn't think a buyer.
Oh yeah, buyer. Sorry.
No,
yes, buyer.
no.
Well, actually, it's a seller. It's a seller. The buyer, not so much. I got one too. I got one.
Is relative to this. So I have a property that is being sold by an elderly person, and they want it sold as is. And I understand that now all properties are as is. But in this case, if they did do a home inspection, they don't. There is no money for home repairs. So is that where we would put that under additions, or we put that under additional terms that the property is being sold that way, or how do we designate that in the?
Well, the listing in Virginia, it's always been, since I've been an agent, which has been 20 years, it's always been the property sells as is unless otherwise agreed to in writing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're selling a property as is, that means your seller is not fixing anything, they're whatever, and you're going to advertise it that way, then there is in the contingencies and clauses addendum, there is an as-is clause that you would want to add to your contract that says that the following terms or paragraphs are being removed from the contract to theoretically convey the property as is.
Right, but I was talking about with regard to the actual listing agreement. Is there somewhere we have to put that on here?
There is. There's a box if you watch the video from last week. So there's a box in there where you can market and advertise the property as is.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of like a handyman special, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right, one more question and then we're moving on. Moving on, man, moving on.
Hey, Steve, I have a question about showings. So I have a seller who really doesn't want to do showings. She's very much trying to limit it. She's like, we'll only show it to people that are really interested and well qualified. And I'm kind of concerned about fair housing. So we're requiring everyone to have a pre-approval letter, no exception.
Are you checking that?
They have to send it to me ahead of time.
Oh my God. Sorry to hear that.
So we have 9 showings for Saturday, and she's like, well, why are you scheduling all these showings? And she really just doesn't want to be available for and I'm trying to handle it and have a conversation with her, but I don't want to get in trouble. So
right.
So where are we on a situation where a seller really wants to limit showings? What's your advice?
Well, you're in a tight pickle, right? So, but my advice is always to try and figure out ways to work around it, right? Which I would try and work around it in other ways. Like I would have as many open houses during a period of time over the weekends that I possibly could in order to accommodate a 2 or 3 or 4 hour block on a Saturday or Sunday to allow as many people to come in as possible in order to mitigate what I'm perceiving as a seller's inconvenience in regards to selling their own property. I would also jack up my compensation a % or 2, because if I have to put this much legwork into trying to sell someone's house because they're not really interested in selling it, I would try and figure out a way to get compensated for my time and effort as well. So those are 2 things, and then I would have a conversation with her. The more you limit and the more you limit your exposure, the lower your price is going to be. So if you're okay, and not only are you going to limit the price, but you're going to see more contingencies, which is also going to lower her net. So, I haven't had to ever deal with that on the sales side. I have dealt with that on the landlord tenant side, where you're trying to list a property and the landlord is insistent that you put the property on when the tenants are there, and you're trying to work around tenants' lives, even though their lease says that they have to allow showings and stuff like that. But tenants can be very restrictive sometimes. So I would put it under the same equation. And how I've gotten around that is to do like periods of time on like a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday or a Wednesday or whatever, in order to have a block of time several times a week to allow showings during those periods of time. And it seemed to work, but that's all I can offer you. Good luck. All right. Can I move on? All right. Only because I'm trying to cover everything today. The next one here is the Bright Office Exclusive, which I know everybody wants to look at. So anytime you have a listing agreement, whether it's a lease or a sale, if it's not going into the MLS as coming soon, active, then it has to go in within 2 days as an office exclusive. And you have to add this form to your listing agreement. And so this is the form. It's in Sky Slope. So when you do the template for listing for lease, well, yeah, some people, if you brought your thing from last week, you don't have it, sorry. But it's, like I said, it's in Sky Slope. And here's a picture for you. So this form must be submitted to Bright MLS within 2 calendar days after seller, I don't have one either, so after the seller landlord signatures are obtained on a listing contract. If information about the listing will not be entered into the MLS for distribution to other subscribers, and the property will not be publicly marketed. So there's some things on here that you would have to initial or sign. Your client would have to initial and sign, but you're pretty much, just because you have to enter it in as an office exclusive does not mean your seller has to allow showings or you have to market it. If your plan, the sellers, I think the scenario we talked about a little bit last week was if your seller wants to put a property on in a month from now, or they're doing repairs, they're getting it ready, you sign the listing agreement today, they're doing repairs, they don't want it incoming soon status until April 15th or somewhere a month from now. Just because you have to put it in as an office exclusive doesn't mean it has to be available to show other Samson agents. You don't have to market it. You don't have to do anything with it. It's just a way to placeholder that listing in the MLS so that they know that listing is out there with a signed listing agreement. And the reason being is, right, they're trying to cut down on the number of pocket listings. So how many of us, you don't have to raise your hand, have had a listing agreement? It's not coming on for a month. However, we've talked to other agents about a listing agreement that we've had that's coming on, right? We may or may not have sold that agreement prior to it going on the market. It does happen, right? So this is just another way to comply with NAR's policy to get away from our agents that are doing pocket listings. So now it goes in the MLS within 2 days of it being signed by the client, not the broker. So once it's signed by the client, the listing agreement, it has to be in Bright MLS. And Sarah sent out step-by-step instructions in order how to comply with that. If you didn't get it, it's on the Nest as well. So it's not that much harder than putting in a normal listing. You add a listing just like you normally would in Bright. You would click the box to add a listing. One of the first questions it's going to ask you, is this an office exclusive? You click the box yes. Now it's an active or whatever it's called, office exclusive, right? So it has different terminologies in there. If it ends up being an office exclusive for the whole time, that's fine. If you end up going to coming soon as a regular listing where it's going to go in the MLS, say on April 15th, all you have to do is uncheck the box for office exclusive, and now it becomes a normal listing. You upload it, publish it, and it goes into MLS at 1 day on the market, just like it normally would. Nothing's really changed. So you have these things that the folks should initial. I would recommend that you have the seller initial each one. And then also, it also says, do not market the property until it is scheduled to be on in the MLS on whatever that date is. So there's a statement for that. Or do not submit property to the MLS or publicly market it during the entire listing period. So if I want to do an office exclusive the whole time, I don't even want it in the MLS, that would be the one that they would initial off on. So they should initial off on one or the other, or they could start off as one and then later on change their mind and go to the other, and you could just make an adjustment. Then they would sign it, and you would send it in as part of your listing agreement. So I would recommend that every time you go on a listing appointment now that you have this form with you. Yes, sir. Sorry. Just waking you up.
Good morning. All right, so in the Bright now, if it's an office exclusive, the drop down says active, and then it also says pending, and it says closed.
Yes.
And
As an
so-
office, it says active office exclusive or something like that.
That's right. Active office exclusive, pending office exclusive, closed office exclusive.
Yes.
So I was told if you sell it while it's office exclusive, you have to select one of those. But then I've also been
Yes.
told that you can switch it to regular pending and then close so you can get credit. And I've gotten mixed information from
That would be
everyone on that.
That would not be true. So if you sell a property as a listing agent as an office exclusive, you cannot get credit. They don't want it published as a normal sale in the MLS because they believe that listing is not fair market value. So whether you get credit for it or not, they don't really care. The buyer side could get credit for it. A buyer can put it in as a comp once they finish the transaction. But you as a listing agent, currently you don't get credit for it in your MLS printout. But that's the truth. So you're not supposed to, but a lot of people do it that way. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. Yes, ma'am. Up here.
Just to clarify, this owner seller A, does this have to match on the listing agreement? Like it says on or before date, like you have listings coming up and they're still doing work. So the listing would be on or before, say May 1st, but what if it happens sooner? Like, do they have to match? Can it be pushed back depending on?
Well, in your listing agreement, you should have dates in there.
Right.
So that should match up with your dates in your listing agreement.
But if this date changes, so let's just say May 1st, but we actually get on the market a week early. Does this then, do I have to change an initial this, or is still good enough for the Bright?
You should. Well, you're going to do our next form, which is brokerage representation agreement to change. So if your listing agreement says you're going to go on the market as coming soon on April 21st, and you're ready on April 15th. But all your documentation says April 21st. You would do a brokerage representation agreement amendment and change the dates to the coming soon period to go from whatever to whatever. And then your live date, of course, because that would move as well, most likely, you could do your live date as well to active, all on one brokerage agreement or brokerage amendment. No. But if they do ask you for it, because they are starting to ask for paperwork on stuff, you'll have the appropriate paperwork. Okay?
Oh, quick question. So the broker does not have to have, we don't have to have the broker signature in case we get close to that 2-day deadline. Just reiterating what you said.
Well, you don't have to, but the timeline starts for you as soon as it's signed by
right
the client.
Okay, because I uploaded it twice because I was
Right.
afraid I was going to not hit the 2-day, and then
Right.
okay.
But our internal policy says that once you put a property in Bright, you should have a signed brokerage agreement within 2 days, or maybe it's 2 or 4.
Well, and then when we say submitted into the MLS or going into the MLS,
yes,
does that just mean published? Because I like to start my draft, and that made me nervous that once it was in draft form,
right,
a clock would be ticking. Or does it not matter because it's just about the listing agreement date?
You can once it in the MLS, it's not going to go to anybody. So you can manipulate that data for the whole period of time. It's kind of like the period of time where it's sitting there and you can go in and edit it. The only difference is now it's published as an office exclusive.
Okay, so the only date that matters is the one on the listing agreement, not when it's actually made published in the MLS.
The main date is the date that the client sign it. So the client sign it on Monday, it has to be uploaded in 2 days from the date signed. So Tuesday, Wednesday. So by the end of the day, Wednesday, you should have it in Bright. Published.
Okay, that's kind of my question too. Okay.
But I mean, if you're talking, I don't know what drafting of the listing agreement. But she's talking about the data in the MLS. So she, you know how like before we'd put it in the MLS, it's not coming on for 21 days. We would kind of work on it a little bit here and there, and then we would publish it, right? Now you have to publish it, but it's only published to Bright. There's no one else seeing it other than Samson gets a listing of it. Yeah, there's only a few documents. So, yeah. No. All right, so moving on. This used to be called the Listing Agreement Amendment. They changed the name to the Brokerage Representation Agreement Amendment. Now it covers all the different brokerage agreements. Before, you just had a listing agreement amendment and then no other way to change any other forms, right? So now you have a form where you can use it for multiple things. So this is the Brokerage Representation Agreement Amendment. It's set up in different classifications. The first one here at the top, we're filling this out is made on whatever that date is, and we're going to check a box. The brokerage agreement is either an agreement to represent a seller or a tenant, or it's an agreement to represent a buyer or a tenant. So I said that wrong, but seller or landlord or buyer and tenant. The purpose of this amendment is to modify certain provisions of the brokerage agreement as specified below. Except for those terms expressly modified herein, this amendment shall not alter, modify, or change the brokerage agreement in any other respect. So whatever you put in here is the only changes. It doesn't change any other thing. And all other terms and provisions of the brokerage agreement are ratified and confirmed and shall remain in full force and effect. So we're going to make changes to our listing agreement. So we would say, okay, we're going to check the box exclusive right to sell listing agreement, or if we're making a change to a lease agreement, we're going to check the exclusive right to lease listing agreement. It also covers land. So if you're doing unimproved land, you could use this for that as well. So you're going to fill out the top part. Looks very familiar than some of our other forms. You're going to put in the seller's information, the broker, the address, and then you're going to click on whatever the change is. So you're changing the list price. So I did a listing agreement initially. We didn't know the price. So now we're going to update. We're going to put a sale price in. So now I'm going to put in whatever that list price is going to be. Or I'm going to extend the listing period. Or I'm going to take it out of the MLS and re-enter it for whatever reason in accordance with the seller's directions, or the other. So other is probably going to cover most of your stuff. If you're going to change the coming soon period, if you're going to do that type of stuff, any other alterations to the listing agreement, you would mark in there. You would also, if you're going to take a temp off, it has appropriate boxes for there. If you're going to withdraw it from the MLS, so your client calls you one day and says, I want this property out of the MLS because I need to fix the garage door. When I was backing out, I forgot to raise it and I just blew the back garage door off. Can we take it out of the MLS can we withdraw it for a period of time? Because I don't know when it's going to be fixed. You could do that, or you could do temp off or whatever. Or the seller says, I don't want to list this property with you anymore. I'm tired of you. You're getting on my nerves. I'm voiding this agreement. And you say, no, you can't. You owe me $2,000 early termination fee. Well, I don't want my property in the MLS. You could say, well, until we figure out the early termination fee, I'll withdraw it from the MLS, but you're still going to owe me a termination fee. But you could take you could put it in withdrawn status, which tells the community that it's withdrawn from the MLS, but you still have an active brokerage agreement. The next part is your buyer-tenant agreement side. So here you're going to either check you're using a buyer or a tenant agreement. You're going to fill out the top part the same as you just did on the other one, and then you're going to make your modifications as needed, right? Before, a lot of people on the, say, the buyer agency or the tenant rep agreement would just, most of the time it was they were updating the termination date because they would end before they got their client a buyer, especially in today's buyer's world. You have, say, a 90-day agreement, and it's going to expire. Before, we would just line it out on there and have them initial it, and sometimes we sent it in for broker signature, sometimes we didn't. But in this case, now you can just extend the expiration date and do it on this form, have your buyer sign it, and then make it part of your buyer agent agreement, upload it into SkySlope, and you're good to go. There's appropriate signature blocks down here for whatever scenario you may be into, and a broker signature. Any questions on this form? Oh my God, I can't believe we made it to the end. All right, well, thank you for coming. Is there any other questions outside of what we talked about that you had questions about? Because I'm going to stop, they're going to stop recording. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Zach.